So far, we have learned at the front end, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. We even delved into the library React to build user interfaces with the JavaScript programming language. Then we started learning about databases. We learned about SQL, the language that can be used to interface with a relational database management system. And then we learned to use the graphical user interface for Postgres called pgadmin. And we built tables to store messages and users for the application that we built to post a message or leave a comment, a feature very common in many websites and web applications today. Now we're going to venture into tying everything together because we have a front end, but we have no way of communicating with the database. So that's the middleman that we're going to implement today. We're going to use a backend using the language JavaScript. So it used to be that JavaScript was only able to be written in the front end, in the client side, but now we can do it outside. So we're going to use the library called Express to make it a little easier for us to build an HTTP server. Now, if you're new to programming in general, basically a library is just code that somebody else wrote, and we can use it as a tool in your own project. So before we go into Express, we gotta talk about Node.js. So if you're gonna need Node.js. If you have participated in a previous lecture, you should already have it. Basically, Node.js is just a fancy name to say JavaScript, except outside of the browser. So traditionally, we had the HTML pages that were styled CSS, and if we wanted to manipulate a document, we would use JavaScript. And then somebody had the idea, okay, why not use JavaScript as a general purpose programming language, just like all the others? And then we can actually build things on the server side, like a web server. And that's what happened, that they call it Node.js. Okay, so you're also gonna need Postgres for this, like I said before, because we built some tables and we're gonna need to verify that they're being, you have to communicate with the database, so to store the information. The repository I'm gonna use for this, again, is this one. So if you wanna follow along with the code that's already existing, that's where it is. Okay, so without much talk, I'm just gonna go to Visual Studio Code in the repository. And we already have the web client directory where the React application is. So I'm gonna CD there just to show you and refresh your memory. CD web client, npm start. If it's your first time doing this, you gotta do npm install first. And then after that, you can do start. Okay, so this should open the web app in the browser in localhost colon 3000, I think. Let me go to Chrome. Okay, so here it is, localhost colon 3000 in the browser address bar. I'm using Chrome right now. This basically you have a text area. If you click write message, it should add to this list of messages. And we did this with a fake backend. Now we want to do our own backend. That's the goal. Okay. Now let me refresh your memory about pgadmin. Here's pgadmin, which is a graphical user interface client for the Postgres server. So we created a database, full stack DB3, schemas, public. We got two tables, one for messages, one for users. If you recall, we want to use the table for messages to store that information that we saw. And we have this body column. Okay, now let's go back to VS Code. So basically, we're going to create a new directory here and write some code for the HTTP server. So let me call the new folder server. Okay, and then there I'm going to create a file. Let's call it index.js. So if I want to write JavaScript outside the context of a website, you just have to create a file with the extension .js, and you can run that using the node command. So you would say node index.js. For example, if I say console.log hello world, and then I have to open a new tab or window for the terminal. In case of VS Code, I can just click this here and choose which one I want. So I'm going to have two terminal windows. One is for the front end and another one is for the back end. Okay, so you have to have two separate ones. And I'm going to cd to server. I'm going to say node space index.js. And the statements in the file will be executed from the top. And you can see that it prints to the console hello world. Okay, so that's how we run JavaScript outside the browser. Now, this is nice, but let's delete it. Now, we got to use Express, the library. Now, this library is code that somebody else wrote, so we got to bring that code to our project. But before I do that, I got to initialize this directory as an NPM project, which is what I'm going to use to install third-party packages. NPM is like a node package manager, which allows you to install third-party packages. So when you install Node, in my case here, I have 18 and I have NPM already comes with Node when you install. So first I'm gonna initialize this as a project, and all it means is you need to have a file that's called package.json. So to do that, I can just do npm space init. And it's gonna ask a few questions. You can just press enter and accept the default throughout, and you can change it later. Basically, it creates a file, package.json. That's a manifest file, which will basically list the dependencies for your project. Now, with that, I can install Express by saying npm space install space Express. In case you're wondering, where's this stuff being installed from? It's being installed from the official npm registry. You can find that at npmjs.com. Let me just share that out of curiosity. npmjs.com is the registry for npm. So if you look for Express, you should find it. And this is the page for that thing that we just installed. It's very nice, has the README and everything. You can even look at the source code if you click the repository here. And you can actually read the code for that somebody else wrote, right? This library. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. If we were to do this like from scratch, we would have to use Node's HTTP module, and then it'll be a lot more code to write. So we don't want to do that. You always want to leverage the work of others and build on top. Okay, let's go back. After doing the npm install, we should be able to see that the package JSON will now have under dependencies property the express key with the version we're currently using. This case, mine is 4.21.0. You should also notice there's a new directory called node modules that appears here. Basically, any third-party packages will be installed in this. So if you want to see and verify that Express has actually been installed, you just look at node modules and find the Express directory here. And here you'll find its own package.json and all its dependencies and the source code you can actually read here. And you might be wondering, why do we have all these other dependencies there? It's because Express in turn also depends on other people's code, so it also installs that. So it's a lot of stuff, and you might also hear there's a lot of messy stuff and with node modules if you get experience. It's kind of a pain, but it's the way it is. So many files. Anyway, let's go back here. So index. Now that we have Express installed, we can use it by saying require quotes Express. You can use double or single, it doesn't matter. And then we start this in a variable. I usually call the same as the package name, which is Express, which should match the key into the JSON package JSON file under dependencies. So you call that Express like this, and that will give you an app. And we start in a variable usually called app or app. Okay. And finally, just to power a server, you can just call the app has an object. App is an object, has a function called listen. So you can call that. And you can pass the port that you want to start the server in. For example, 3000. So to run that, you just call node index.js. You should see no prompt here, but it's actually a server running. So if I verify, I think it might conflict actually. Let me see. We are already using 3000 for the front end, right? So we want to change that. Never mind. Press Control C to kill. I'm going to choose 3001 instead because we cannot use the same part. All right. Let's verify going to the browser. I'm going to localhost colon 3001. I should be able to see cannot get slash. That means it worked. Okay, so it'd be nice if you could see a better prompt when you execute the server. So what we do is for the second argument here to listen, you can pass a function that will be called immediately after powering up the server. So you can say a console log here saying the server is running at http colon slash slash localhost colon 3001. If you want to put the port in a variable, const port equals 3001. So you can interpolate here, substitute the value with the $, curly braces. Oops, name of the variable. But to do that, you need the backtick. And here you would is port. That way, if I change port here to 1234, it will change here and there at the same time. I don't have to change it twice. Okay, so I just declared a variable. So if you want to refresh your memory, if you're not familiar with JavaScript, you want to use a variable to hold on to a value for later use. The left-hand side is the name of the variable, equals some value that you want to assign to that variable. And then you need a const keyword, which just means I want to define a variable that's only assigned once, but no longer, you don't need to reassign it afterwards. And then here in the string, if you want to substitute the value for the variable port, you can use interpolation, string interpolation dollar curly brace, and then the name of the variable. But to do that, you need to surround it with backtick instead of the single or double quote. Anyway, whenever you make changes to your source code, you want to kill the server and restart. Don't forget. So Control C to send the interrupt signal. And then you run that again. You can see now server is running. It's better feedback for the user. They understand the server is running. You can even Control click to follow the link. And it should open that in the browser. Okay, so let's think about how we're gonna lay this out. So the front end, so the database has a resource that's messages. We need to operate on those resources. So the front end will be asking for multiple operations. For example, I need to list all the messages. That's one of the operations we can do. Another is I want to create a new message. That's another one. So we can focus on those two. Of course, there'll be more. For example, I want to edit a message. I want to see only a single individual message. I want to delete a message. You can have all of these extra features, but let's focus on the basics. Let's first look into listing. Okay, so when we build a web server, I'm going to build here what's called an API, application programming interface, and it will be serving, communicating with the front end with plain text, but in the format JSON via the HTTP protocol. So usually for APIs, we have what I call endpoints, which is basically an operation you want to do. For example, there's an endpoint or a route to list all the messages. Okay, and to do that, we usually follow a convention called REST. If you ever heard the term REST, representational state transfer, that's basically in its essence is following this naming convention. So if you want to list a resource, the client will make an HTTP request using the method get to the path slash the resource name. For example, in our case, we're going to make get slash messages. So when the person tries to access localhost colon 3001 slash messages using the verb get, the backend server will ask the database for all of those messages. It will basically make a SQL query, select star from messages, for example. And then it will get the results and then redirect that back to the user. Okay, so how do we do that in Express? We're going to call on the app dot, and then you give the name of the verb, in this case, get. And then the first argument is the path, in this case, messages slash messages. The second argument, it's the handler function. Basically, what do you want to do when we receive the request to get slash messages? This function will be executed. And then in the function, we have to send the user a reply because we act always on request response. The server, client side makes a request, the server has to give back a response. This function usually has two parameters. One is rec, the second is res. You can spell it out if you want. The first is for the request and the second for response. Okay? So in its most basic form, if you want to send a response, you can say res.send. That's the name of the function. And then as an argument, parentheses, you can write whatever you want to send back. For example, a plain text string, hello there. So when we do that, we're going to test it in a bit. You can go to the browser and type localhost colon 3001 slash messages. That should make a get request to that address. And it will hit this function here. And the function in turn will call on the response to send hello there. So let's Control C here and restart the server. I'll go to the browser. I'm going to go to localhost colon 3001 slash messages. And I should see hello there. So if you recall, when you type an address into the browser and press enter, that's by default a GET request to this URL. Now we want to be able to receive the messages like we did for that fake backend. And to do that, what we're going to do is ask the database for that information. But before we move into that, let me just give an example. Let's say we had an array of objects here. Let's call it messages. Array is square brackets. And each array has an element, so we make an object of curly brace. Let's give it a property message, hello, like this. And then I'll make another one, message, hi. So if you want to send this array of objects, like in JSON format, you can just go here and say, send the messages array, and it should do all the work to send it back. Let me restart the server because we changed the code. And we're going to the browser. And we should receive back the string in JSON format. There's a detail about this. Um, if you want to debug requests through the browser, like again, we can use the dev tools, press F12 or right click inspect. I'll go to the network tab and let me go to all here in the filter. I'm gonna click refresh. And I'm gonna click this one and I can investigate this HTTP request. You can see a request method was get to this URL. You can see the response headers here, which is basically whenever you make a request and when you get a response, you can get HTTP headers, which is basically metadata about the request, which is just key value pairs. So you have the key and the value. And then the request headers there. Anyway, something I want to touch upon is usually when you reply back from a backend server with JSON, you want to set the header content type to application/JSON so that the client understands, oh, okay, you meant to say to send something in JSON, so I'll interpret your response as JSON. If you want to do that, you can go here right before you do the send. You can res set header and content dash type, comma, application/JSON. So set header function of the response object takes two arguments. The first is the property name for the header, and the second is the value for that property name. So let me save, Control C in the terminal. Go back to the browser, refresh. Let me go to the DevTools, refresh, see if the header is there. I'm gonna go to response headers. I think there's some caching going on, so I'm gonna disable cache here. Let's see. I should be able to see content type. Yeah, there you go. Right here. That way the browser will interpret that. Okay, JSON. I think I found a Chrome. Firefox it automatically formats nicely for me. In Chrome, we have to press this pretty print. Let me show in Firefox. Yeah, Firefox is nice live view. You can click to see the raw, pretty print. You can see the live JSON. Anyway, so let's see, go back to VS Code. Okay, enough of that. Let's look into how we can connect to the database. So in order to do that, I need a database kind of driver or client that obviously I'm not going to write it from scratch, so we have to leverage the work of other people. So to do that, I'm going to go to npmjs.com and show you there's a library we can use to access, make database queries using Node.js. Go to npmjs.com, and if you look for Postgres, for example. So you would look at all of these packages to see which one best fits what you're trying to do. Now, the one I'm going to use is this one called PG, a Postgres client. So that's the one I want to install with npm. So you can see this is the command. And they tell you how to use it here. If you click the docs, documentation, and you can read and everything. Anyway, let's go. I'm going to kill the server and say npm install PG. Okay. Now I should look at my package JSON. I should see PG under dependencies, and the version is 8.13.0. If you verify node modules, you should also see PG here. Anyway, let's now write some code here. So after we do the Express app here, we're gonna connect. We need to connect to the database first. Now to do that, we're going to instantiate a new PG client like it's said in the docs. To do that, we got to require at the top PG, const PG equals, so we can use it. And we're going to say PG dot client. I think we got instantiate that. So pretty much this PG, this object has a property called client. And this one, we can create a new object with say new PG client like this. And then we give it some options as an object. And it will be the database, the user, the password. Now the database, if you recall from PG admin, I created a database. I called it full_stack_db3. If you don't have a database, you got to go through this and click create here. And you got to do what we did in the lecture that we did before. Anyway, and then the user will be, if I scroll down here, login group roles. We created full stack user 3, words separated by underscore. And then the password, and I have my own password. Okay. So here, full stack db3, I think full stack user 3, and then my password. And you can put this in a variable. You can call it PG client, for example. And then I think we can do connect like this to connect to the database. Now this connect function here returns a promise. Now, if you recall promises from the front end, we have to handle the promise. So we can do the dot then. So ideally, we would only let this code here run after connecting to the database. Otherwise, you can have some problems there. So you would do then, and then you can move everything inside this function. Okay, somebody's asking, how can I quickly get to DB if I wasn't in the last lecture? You can click the SQL directory here, and you have to follow, for example, create the database first, and then create the row, and then the tables are these. Let me show you. PG admin, you gotta have a server first. So you register server, give it a name, under connection, localhost, or 127.0.0.1. You can leave the Postgres user. Password, choose the password you set up for the database. And you click save. Once you got that, you should have it here like I did. I expand. And what I'm gonna do is first create a login group role. Right click, create. Login group role, give it a name like full stack user. Definition, give it a password. Privileges, make sure it can log in as toggled. And this generates the SQL here like that, which is what I have in the repository code. If you were to manually type that, but that might have be, you might have to change that if you run it directly from the source code, because there's extra stuff there. But basically, after doing that, you would create a database, or right click here, create database, full stack DB, and then owner would be the user that you created, like full stack user 3, and click save. And that should create a database. Now for the tables, you'd have to expand this schema public and then go to tables and create here, but that might be overkill. So you would have to go here and maybe copy this. For example, copy that And then you gotta go to the query tool, tools query tool. Paste it there, but it's not gonna work off the bat due to this thing here, the sequence. So you gotta change this to big serial and remove this. Because if you do it like that, it's gonna complain that the sequence doesn't exist. So I changed that to big serial, not no. Do the same for the users table. And you click run. Some stuff here might also mess up because there's no users, I think. Yeah, it's gonna mess up. So if maybe if you did users first. Anyway, I gotta move on. So let me know if you get it. Uh, all right. Um, okay, so we were here. We created a new PG client. Then we call the connect function that returns the promise. So we gotta handle the promise. And after that, we pass a callback here. And I use the arrow function, by the way. Usually I've been using just the function keyword in this bootcamp, but you can also use that arrow. So this is the equivalent. Of course, using arrow has some implication about the keyword this, but in this case, it's okay. Anyway, there's also another way to handle promises through async await. If you don't want to have this callback kind of thing, you can actually do the following. Let me show you. I'm going to move this back outside. Instead of doing dot then, I'm going to put the keyword await before that. But to use await, it has to be, this statement has to be inside a function that's asynchronous. So I have to define a function, async function, setup app, and move that inside. And I'll move all the other stuff inside as well. And this is just a function definition. So I have to call it to actually run the commands or statements, instructions that were defined within the body of the function. Okay, so using await, it will not execute this code unless this promise has been fulfilled, which is different from not having await. If you didn't have await, this would be executed and it would execute everything afterwards. It wouldn't wait for the promise to be fulfilled. Okay, let's see. Okay, before we move on, I also want to talk about a few points. Let me see. If you run that just to test it out, Nodejs.js. If you get no error message, that means everything is connected correctly. Actually, yeah, that's okay. Anyway, so every time we change the source code, we gotta restart. So that might be annoying to you. So let me teach you how you can leverage a tool called nodemon to automatically restart whenever you change your source code. So we're gonna install a third-party package called nodemon by doing npm space install space dash dash save dash dev nodemon. Now I might be asking, why did you add dash dash save dev? That's to separate the dependency listing in package.json. So if I look at package.json, usually it goes under dependencies when you install anything. But if you want to separate that into the dev dependencies, you can use that option, --save -dev. People like doing this just because they separate what's necessary for production versus what's strictly just needed for development. Although you don't need to do that, it's nice or organization feature. Anyway, we got nodemon there. So usually what we do now is use, instead of saying node, we're gonna use nodemon. But nodemon has been installing the node modules and .bin. There's a nodemon command here. For Windows is the CMD and for Linux and Mac is nodemon. So you would have to say /node modules /bin/nodemon to actually reach that file, that command, space, and then index.js. And you see it's gonna watch your, by default, it watches JS extensions, JSON and MJS, CJS. You can change that, but it should work off the bat. So if I were to change index, for example, port 3002, it will restart automatically. And you should see now running to 3002. Let me revert. Okay, very nice. So we don't have to Control C every time we change the code and restart. Now, it might be tedious to type the whole path. So for people who are lazy, instead of typing this node modules bin, you can type npx preceding nodemon, and it will automatically find it in that .bin directory. You can even go one step further if you want to create what we call npm script command. So instead of typing npx nodemon, I just want to type, for example, npm start, for example. If you want to type npm start and then run nodemon index.js, you could go to package.json. Under scripts property, you're going to define a new property for that object called start, and that will just call nodemon index.js. So when I say npm start, it actually calls nodemon index.js. That way you don't have to know the specific implementation of the tool you're using to restart it every time. So you can have different kinds of scripts, one for production, one for development, and so on. Start is a special case in that you don't need to say npm run start. But if you add, for example, let's say I were to do the dev one just for development, which we'll call nodemon index.js. And if I were to do production, I want to run npm start with node index. Right? Production, we don't want to use nodemon. We don't want to be restarting all the time. That would be messed up. Okay, if I do that, I would have to do, for the development one, I have to say npm run dev. Cannot just say npm dev. And that should call nodemon index. So if you were to do the start, you can do run start, or you can just say npm start, which is like a special case. It's the only one that allows you, apart from, I think, build and test. Anyway, with that out of the way, when we need to develop, you just npm run dev, and it should call nodemon. That's the thing I want to talk about. The other thing is the credentials. Let's go. Usually when we have credentials of sensitive information or configuration things that might change, you don't want to commit that to version control. So you don't want to include that in your source code here. So usually we separate that. Simplest way you can think of right now is creating a configuration file or a secrets file. For example, secrets.json. And then here you can type all your secrets, which would be these values here. Let's call it database. Let me just paste everything and change to JSON. So it's JSON format in my case. Although you can do .env file if you like a Linux environment variables style. And you just change, each property has to have double quotes and each value double quotes as well. because it's JSON, strictly JSON. Oops, and they're separated with a colon. And the reason for doing this is this file will be ignored by Git. So you would go typically, you would have a .git ignore file, and you would write secrets.json there. So I'm telling Git, my version control software, do not commit the file secrets.json, do not track that. We don't want that to be committed. And that way, you see, it's kind of grayed out. So if I do the git status here, that might be too many there, but because of the node modules, that's another one you want to ignore. Let me put node modules here, slash. I think you don't need slash, but basically, we always want to ignore node modules as well, because it's just too many files. And if you include that in version control, it might be inefficient. And usually you just always npm install them anew when you're starting, you're copying the code to another place. With that out of the way, you can see the git status became cleaner here. So I don't see secrets. I don't see all the files from node modules. But if I remove it, you can see this thing is going to change with all the files appearing. So we want to git ignore them. All right, so I put the git ignore at the root of the repository. Okay, now with that, I have this file that will not be committed to version control. So I can, instead of writing my sensitive information there, I would pull it from that file. How would I do that? Well, in JavaScript, it's easy. So there's two ways. The longer way is you read a file with the fs module, fs.readFile sync, for example, and then you json.parse that. The quicker way is to just require, because if you require JSON file, it will automatically convert to a JavaScript object. So here at the top, I can do require ./secrets.json, and you can put that in a variable, const secrets. And here you can just say secrets dot whatever name you gave for the property, like database, user, and password. So here would be database. Here would be secrets dot user, secrets dot password. That way you don't have sensitive information in your source code. In case, I don't know, some reason you have some unauthorized party, they're not going to get the password because this file is never committed. Okay, now let's actually make a query. So if you go to the endpoint for /messages, here, I don't want this message to come from an array there. We're going to call the database. So we're going to use pg client dot. So you can see there are many functions from my Visual Studio Code helper. So the function going to be dot query. And then you can write the SQL query as a string here. For example, select star from messages. And this thing returns a promise. So we can either use a sync await or dot then. So if you do dot then, you're gonna receive a function there, I think with the result. And I think that result property will have rows property. So you can do move this res send inside there. And const messages would be basically result.rows. And you can send messages as that. Let's try it out. I'm gonna refresh here. See pretty print. I got now everything from the database. If you verify the database through pgadmin, tables, messages, right click, view edit data, you should be able to match every single one of these with what you saw from the response. here. Okay. Now let's go to the front end, and I'll show you how that's going to play out there. The front end code is under web client directory, source, app, and we have this message defined under component, so you can go there. And here's the React component that's defined as a function messages. And we have a use effect call, which basically after the first render, hence the empty array here, we call this function to fetch, make an HTTP request to the fake backend. Now it's not going to be this fake backend. You're going to delete everything. It's going to be HTTP colon, no S, okay? Don't put HTTPS, / localhost colon 3001. That's the URL for the backend API that we just built, /messages. That's it. And everything else should run according to before, as long as we're using body here for message. We actually use title, so this one would have to change, right? To the body here. I changed to the body because we call it body, not title. Anyway, let's go there. Probably we'll get an error. Let's see. See, you got an error. Why? We got an error. Let's read the console. Cross origin request blocked. The same origin policy disallows reading the remote resource. So this is a problem of what we call cores. Reason, cores header access control allow origin missing. So when you have kind of domains are different between the client, which is localhost 3000, and the backend, localhost 3001, the browser has this mechanism to prevent making a request as like a security measure. So in order to allow the browser to make the request, the server has to send an HTTP header called access control allow origin, and it has to kind of whitelist your localhost 3000, which is the URL for the client. Either do that, very specific, or you could allow everything by saying star for the value. Okay, so if you go back to the source code for the server, under before you send the messages here, you can set another header. Res set header, access dash control dash allow dash origin. If you put star for the value, it should allow everything. And now it's working. Because if I look at network and I look at this, I think I have to click XHR to make it more specific. Because when we make fetch call, it's a XHR XML HTTP request. If you look at the request, the response headers, you should see access control allow origin to star. If you want to be more specific and only allow your front end, you could change that. By the way, I don't know if I was sharing, but I was sharing Firefox here. XHR, response headers will access control allow origin star. Anyway, going back to VS Code here. You can put here localhost 3000 if you want to be more specific. In the production, it'll be the domain, right? Whatever.com, right? Like, for example, api.whatever.com is your actual API, and your front end would be like www.whatever.com. So you put www.whatever.com here. Okay, so if you do that, refresh, let's see if I do it right. I think I might have to remove, let me see. If I put localhost there. Or disable cache. Does not match. Okay, it's not matching. Why? Let's see. I think I have to add HTTP here. Let me go here. HTTP:// I had to add that. Oops, not that. This. And that should work. If I go back here, headers, response, here. Access control allow origin HTTP:// localhost 3000. Okay. Yeah, so that's coming from the database now. Now we're kind of out of time, so next time we can look into how to write and look more into the backend. Okay, you might be wondering, so I have to do this stuff for every request. So we can actually change that later and have it always be set before we send a request. We can do that later. So I have to wrap this up. So we'll see you on the next one.